All right, buonasera signore e signori, and welcome Casa Italiana zerilli-marimò at NYU. My name is Chiara Basso and I'm the Media and Communication Strategist here at Casa. It's a pleasure to welcome you this evening for a powerful event presented in collaboration with NYU SPIA Center for Global Affairs. Tonight we'll be watching Artifact War, a 2024 documentary that sheds light on one of the most tragic and lesser-known consequences of war, the systematic looting and smuggling of cultural property out of Syria by ISIS. Through the extraordinary courage of an archeology professor and his students, Artifact War tells a story of resistance, a fight to protect history itself. What begins as an act of cultural preservation becomes a gripping tale of espionage, moral courage, and the enduring power of heritage in the face of destruction. Following the screening, there will be a panel discussion with several distinguished guests, including Al-Azm, protagonist of Artifact War. Thank you for coming. And professor of Shawnee State University. We will have Gabriele Scarpa, police advisor at INTERPOL to the UN. Svetlana Martynova, countering the financing of terrorism coordinator and senior legal officer at the UN. Welcome. Cecilia Naddeo, senior human rights officer at the UN. The discussion will be introduced and moderated by David Catten from the Center for Global Affairs at NYU. Thank you for coming. You're also honored to have, they will reach us later because actually there is an important meeting happening right now at the UN, but we will have two distinguished guests, Professor Enrico Milano, legal advisor to the permanent mission of Italy at the UN, and General Alfonso Manzo, military advisor to the permanent mission of Italy to the UN. There are no security issues tonight at Casa. Thank you all for joining us for this special evening. Please enjoy the screening of Artifact War and stay with us for the conversation that follows. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. This is the professor. Welcome. And I want at the outset, of course, to say a big thank you to the Casa Italiana for the wonderful hospitality. This is the first and not the last opportunity to cooperate, but I think together with Professor Amr, we have here a fantastic panel, Gabriele Scarpa from Interpol and two wonderful colleagues from the UN Counter-Terrorism Executive Directorate, Svetlana and Cecilia. But I first have a question for the professor. Where we are today with the recovery of all these artifacts. What's going on? Are you involved? What do you tell us?
Well, first of all, thank you for agreeing to host the movie, and thank you for you guys to come and watch, because at the end of the day, that's the purpose, to raise awareness and tell you about what's going on. And I even before I answer that question, I just want to say something very important. I know I'm sitting here talking about this right now, but I'm not the hero of this story. The hero of this story is Adnan and, Abu Farid and all the guys who worked and put their lives in danger doing this kind of work. They're the heroes of the story. That's their story. So obviously, since the fall of the regime and I've been able to go back to Syria. We're trying to rebuild. A lot of our colleagues have been able to start to go back as well and get involved. The institutions, not just the Department of Antiquities, but all institutions in Syria are really in a terrible condition. They were, they have very little capacity. They have very little resources, and you might think it's almost an impossible task, but they're doing their best, and we're trying to now continue supporting them, but in different ways, by providing either advice, support, capacity building, and trying to make sure that, like everything else, there's a big rush now towards Syria to try and help, and sometimes in the effort to help, you can do more harm than help. And because as resources are being sort of channeled towards the issues that are at stake, it was also very important to help the new administration understand where its priorities are going to be, what it should look at, what it should try to support, and prevention of looting and trafficking is going to be is very important. And the reason why I say that is, and this is going to answer your question, we have documented over, I would say, 40,000 images of looted antiquities, trafficked antiquities. About 30%, I'd say about 20 to 25% of that comes from Syria. But what is important and shocking, and what was shocking for us, is that of those, I can't remember now, maybe 8,000 images, 30% of those showed up after the fall of the regime. It was after December. So literally 30% of what we have been able to recover now in terms of data, gather information, is actually after December 2023. And that raised a big question for us. What's going on? Why has that happened? You know, during the war, you saw what was going on, and it was in looting and destruction on an industrialized scale. And yet, in terms of material being and looting activity occurring, it has increased exponentially. And one of the reasons is that with the collapse of the regime, a number of issues came together, and one of them was the fact that there are what little functioning institutions that existed before the collapse now became really inoperable. The protection of, given the state of the security situation there, protection of cultural heritage and cultural property was no longer even, it was no longer even registering as a priority. So, and I think, however, most importantly is how people feel about cultural heritage and cultural property. And I say this because, remember, the laws that were put in place and have in existence that are supposed to prevent the looting and looting of cultural property, that determine who owns what in Syria. In Syria, the state owns all cultural property. Okay? The government, it belongs to the government, it belongs to the state and its institutions. And that, in theory, should be okay. But when you have a state that is corrupt, that is malfeasant, that is authoritarian, that has, for the last 50 years, abused its population, anything that comes from that state is automatically deemed to be it's seen negatively and seen as being unfair. And so for people, they think, okay, I own the land, I own my house, why can't I own what's underneath it? And okay, you can make a case and say, well, that's because it belongs to everybody. This is cultural heritage. This is a national treasure. And that can make sense until you realize, or because if you're Syrian and you live in Syria, you know that the state is actually criminal. It is actually, the institutions are corrupt. The person who claims to be protecting it might actually be stealing it and taking it away. And so for the average person who lives in a rural area, out in the countryside, the uncovering of a mosaic, it triggers a instant sort of security issue. The state comes in, it confiscates the land, confiscates the item, takes it away, and it disappears all the way back to Damascus in the basement of a museum. And that person, as far as they know, in a state of thieves and in a kleptocracy, if you will, as far as they're concerned, the state stole it from them. So why can't they benefit from it? And that's really the heart of the problem of why, when the regime fell, and as far as they were concerned, then all the bad laws, all the unfair laws should go with it, and therefore we should now be able to take.
Let me share with you some good news. I recognize here our colleague, Professor Milano, who represents Italy at the United Nations in the Sixth Committee. Today, Syria took the floor in the Sixth Committee in the Crimes Against Humanity debate. Until last year, Syria was with the group of the Friends of the United Nations Charter, headed by Russia and other states. Very good friends, very many doubts. And until last year, Syria was opposing any step in the direction of a treaty. This year, they said, we support it, and they even joined the Arab group statement. So clearly, hopefully there is a new government. Do you see any possibility for the new government? I know you have to go in, don't you have to retire?
I would like to retire very soon.
Right. I think 59 and a half was quite a long time ago.
Yeah, well, I'm now 62, so we're
okay, you're still young. You're still young.
We're past the day.
Well, you are in Casa Italiana. You have to work another 5 years. You know, Italian law is very strict. Now, every 6 months, we have more time to work. We have a very tough regulation. Our cousins in French, they don't want to change the laws as we did. But so you have at least another 5 years. Would you take the job of Minister of Culture of the new Syrian government?
No.
If it was offered?
No, I definitely would not. I wouldn't even take the position of a chair of our department, let alone a dean. So
okay.
I don't do well with administration.
What about ombudsman of not only Facebook but also Telegram and others?
Ombudsman, yes. Advisor, yes. Okay. Consultant, yes. How
is it possible that it's legal to do what these platforms are doing? This is flatly illegal, both under international law and Italian law and US law, or wherever this happens. I don't understand why there is not law enforcement against those individuals implicated.
It's called CD-240. CD-240 is Common Decency Act Law 240. Remember, this was enacted back in the mid-90s when no one really understood what the internet was going to do. And under CD-240, these platforms are basically not responsible for the content they allow on there. And they have fought tooth and nail to prevent a change in the law. We have tried very hard. We have lobbied.
There is a European directive that says the opposite, and the entire world is trying to block it in every possible fashion.
But these companies are American. Facebook is an American company, and they are protected. And until we manage to get a change in that law, they will continue to do. I mean, literally, it's the Wild West out there. You just click human trafficking, human body parts. I mean, when I talk about human trafficking, I'm talking about marketplace. I can show you on marketplace where you have teenage girls being sold like objects on marketplace, and it'll be like one of the ones that sticks in my mind is this girl hugging a pillow, and the pillow is for sale by the hour. Come on, you can't stop that. You can't filter that. They won't do it. I have weapons. I have a dealer, a Yemeni dealer, negotiating the buying of 50 mil caliber, bullets, machine gun bullets, that are being bought by a guy to sell to a guy in Basra on Facebook, openly.
I think we have a big problem. We have a big problem.
We do.
So this gives us maybe the possibility. We'll come back to you, of course, and the audience will be formulating questions, I'm sure. But allow me to give the floor to our second guest. He represents Interpol at the United Nations. Gabriele Scarpa is the police advisor to the head of the delegation, to the ambassador of Interpol to the UN. Gabriele, can you explain us what Interpol is doing and how maybe can it be used even more in the fight for the protection of cultural property? And by the way, I open a parenthesis here. This is a project of my consulting practicum on international protection of common heritage, and I'm very happy we had this chance to have, and Interpol is our partner. So, Gabriele, please.
Yes, thank you, Professor. And first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor for me and for Interpol to be here. and to share the stage with distinguished speakers. I would say that it's difficult for me to speak after the Professor Al-Azm, but I think that your intervention and the documentary explain very comprehensively the problem of looting of antiquities and even the challenges that we're facing. So the crimes is evolving, is becoming transnational, and criminal organizations are highly adept at exploiting emerging technologies. So we saw about the use of digital platforms, the use of encryption. It's also another challenge, the use of virtual private network, the way how they sell antiquities. So crime is evolving, the world is evolving, and so do organized crime. And so we try, law enforcement and Interpol try to keep up with this technology evolution. And so just to focus on the issue of cultural property, and for those less familiar, I would like also to just give some information about Interpol. Interpol is the largest international police organization in the world with 196 member countries. And Interpol does a lot of activities to support member countries around the world. And when I present Interpol, I always like to highlight the main feature and characteristics of Interpol, because Interpol is a neutral, apolitical, and technical platform which brings together law enforcement worldwide. And I like to highlight this concept because usually we describe this, our activity as police diplomacy. It means that the purpose of Interpol is to bring law enforcement globally together to enhance international police cooperation to fight transnational crime. And sometimes we also bring together law enforcement from countries that, for example, do not have official diplomatic relations. This is because of the nature of Interpol. It's a neutral, apolitical platform, and we bring law enforcement together to fight transnational crimes. Now, just focusing on the topic of the protection of cultural heritage, Interpol has a dedicated unit. It's called Interpol Works of Art Unit. And in this regard, if I may, Professor, just for a few seconds to change, metaphorically speaking, my uniform, because I'm a police officer from Italy, a Carabinieri police officer. And since we are here in Casa Italiana, I would like also, unfortunately for Carabinieri and for Italy, today is a sad day, since 3 Carabinieri died today in a police operation, and many other law enforcement agencies were injured. So since we are here in Casa Italiana, I would like to honor these colleagues. But for the law enforcement in Italy, we should be proud as Italian to highlight how we are pioneering in the field of protection of cultural heritage. Just consider that Italy was the first country to establish in 1969, so almost 60 years ago, a dedicated law enforcement unit for the protection of cultural heritage within the Carabinieri. It's called Carabinieri Command for the Protection of Cultural Heritage. And since then, many other countries follow the example of Italy. And this is not a coincidence that currently the head of the Interpol unit is a Carabinieri officer coming from this very unit. Now, just resuming my role as Interpol official, just to describe the activities of the Interpol unit, I can just summarize in 3 main pillars: the intelligence that we provide to member states, to law enforcement, the operations that we coordinate, and the capacity building that we provide. For the intelligence, Interpol hosts 19 global databases. We talk about almost over 200 million police information, with very useful information for the national investigation of member countries. And we have a dedicated database which is called Interpol Stolen Works of Art, with almost 57 objects recorded, stolen works of art within the database. But the real strength of this database is that these are not only crucial information for law enforcement, for the investigation, but even the public, even you can access this database. For example, you can download an application, and so I invite you to download this application both on Apple and Android. It's called ID Art Mobile. With this application developed by Interpol, you can access the database. For example, you can verify whether a works of art has been reported as stolen. You can report works of art as stolen to the Interpol unit. You can report if there is an archaeological site, for example, at risk of illegal excavation. And this is the real purpose of this app, is to get the support of the public to map the cultural objects, so to enrich the data stored within the database. And always in terms of intelligence, we we do several activities. I will try just to summarize to keep the intervention concise. We release every 6 months, for example, a poster with the most wanted works of art, and you can access through our website. And for example, for the war in Syria, we publish dedicated poster on the most wanted works of art in Syria. Then in terms of operation, we coordinate global operation. For the cultural property, every year we coordinate an operation called Pandora. There are several press releases, so if you are interested also on the website, you can find more information. Just to give you some data about the operational impact, because Interpol is not only strategic partnership, it's also operational impact. The latest operation, we were able to bring together more than 20 countries, and with also international partners such as the World Customs Organization. And in terms of results, we were able to seize and rescue almost 38,000 artifacts, cultural goods. And since digitalization is becoming a challenge, in our operation we'd also monitor the digital platform, and we were able, for example, through cyber patrols in digital platforms, to seize almost 5,000 cultural goods. So these are the operational, the achievements that we can achieve when there is a real and concrete international operation. Then, in terms just of training, Interpol has a clear mandate, which is to train and to establish dedicated cultural heritage unit within the law enforcement and a national database to record works of art, stolen works of art, that must be connected to the Interpol database. So we provide this training. And at the same time, this role is recognized internationally. There are 2 Security Council resolutions that explicitly mention and recognize the role of Interpol, one in 2015 and the second in 2017, entirely dedicated on the problem and the issue of the protection of cultural heritage, and they explicitly mention and urge member states to use our database, and a General Assembly resolution that invite member states to establish dedicated unit. Last thing, just to finish my part, is just to mention, because when we talk about protection of cultural heritage, we cannot mention UNESCO. We have a strong partnership with them. And this is what I would like also, my second invite for you today, is because just a few weeks ago we launched the virtual museum. So I invite you to access the virtual museum on the UNESCO website. It's a very formative and interesting initiative because you can find the works of art recorded in our database, and it's public available, so I invite you to access the virtual museum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriele. And it's incredible what you do, and not very well known, so do more to communicate. And my suggestion, now that you know Professor Amr, why not to create a specific program? Of course, then it's up to Syria to decide, because Syria is a sovereign nation, they decide for themselves, but to offer them the possibility to give them assistance. Maybe can it be done bilaterally by Italy? Here I'm watching, of course, General Manzo here in first row, our military advisor to the UN at the permanent mission, also of the Arma dei Carabinieri. Why not to offer to Syria bilaterally technical assistance to set up this type of unit, unless it already exists in the police or in the law enforcement?
I think the institutions have to be rebuilt, but there are connections. They're starting to do these kind of things.
This would be a great.
It will take time.
Right. Okay. Perfect. All right. So what we have learned from the movie is that all these served to fuel ISIS. I'm very happy to note in the movie that a president, at least a positive president, was shown, and so happy to see that it was coming from The Hague and from the International Criminal Court, which is an institution that is now being under fire. Notwithstanding its issued arrest warrants against the Prime Minister of Israel, Israel entered into a peace agreement recently, and it's working on it. So I don't see why all these measures are justified under whatever policies are put forward. In any case, the International Criminal Court convicted for the looting of artifacts Mr. Al-Mahdi for the destruction of Timbuktu. And that's the very first precedent in international criminal jurisdiction that we can take treasure of. Now, Mr. Al-Mahdi was also the head of a group that pledged allegiance to ISIS. And to fight against groups like ISIS or like Al-Qaeda or other groups, it was created after 9/11 in the framework of the so-called United Nations Security Council Consensus Against Terrorism, a very important unit within the Security Council the executive of Counter-Terrorism Committee that is here represented by two senior experts. On my left, Svetlana Martynova, she's the follow the money. Right? We say we want to fight the crime, follow the money. So she's in charge of that. So maybe I will ask her to introduce her work and how it contributes to this important landscape of law enforcement.
I can follow the money, but not the mics. Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you, first of all, to our hosts, but also to NYU and, of course, to Professor Amr and Italian Mission, who is our good partner on this topic, historically and practically. So I will try to give you a kind of toned-down snapshot on this topic as an example of what we do. United Nations, unlike Interpol, does not have police or does not have, special magic wands and buttons. It's an organization that serves member states and executes the decisions of member states, in our case, the Security Council, with the resources allocated to that, which nowadays is not a lot. So on this specific topic, we have a mandate in the context of countering terrorism and its financing. And on this letter, it came over time more deeply embedded in our work, particularly in terms of various forms of nexus between crime and terrorism and its financing. So we have two main streams, how we acquire our own knowledge, but also how we support member states and other stakeholders. First of all, we monitor how states comply with Security Council resolutions on counterterrorism. And second, based on all of these and all of our engagements, we also monitor trends in terrorism financing, and related areas. We don't do that alone. We, of course, partner closely on this topic with UNESCO, UNICRI, but also outside partners. One good partner on my file is, of course, the Financial Action Task Force, which is the global standard setter on anti-money laundering and terrorism financing. We have recently jointly explored all these money laundering and terrorism financing risks linked to arts and antiquities markets. And in July, the FATF produced its comprehensive update on terrorism financing risks, which I had the pleasure and sleepless year to co-lead together with the French Treasury. And of course, the report did not cite this important topic, which it underscored amongst most lucrative yet under-addressed forms of terrorism financing. And it does acknowledge that it stands really on the intersection of organized crime, conflict economies, and heritage destruction, which serves in turn both as a revenue stream and a propaganda tool for terrorist groups. We have observed different contexts in how this could play out, and zooming out of Syria, it really depends on the situation where there's territorial control, there's looting of archeological sites, there's stolen antiquities from museums, there are imposed taxes on traffickers, where there is no such thing as, strictly speaking, territorial control. There's cooperation with criminal networks to smuggle across borders, to take advantage over weak customs and global demand, which, it was underscored in the video how this actually drives the chain. And while the precise amounts are still unknown, even the most conservative estimates suggest tens of millions of dollars in proceeds just from this activity for terrorism. I know that the video is focused on Syria and some other countries in the Middle East, but there's also Afghanistan. And there are also other areas that are very under-examined, especially across Africa. I know we cited the ICC case. This is probably one. But what is expanding very rapidly there with ISIS and other terrorist groups really expanding their control and activity is very underestimated and overlooked, I could say. The digital dimension of this trade is growing fast. We've seen and spoke a lot on Facebook, and there are other platforms. It's not just this one. It's all about algorithms, how they actually, like Katie said in her part in the movie, they help connect the target contact, the members, the facilitators, the looters, the intermediates, not by, by intent, but by design. This is how the technology is designed to link those users. So, of course, we also noted that these digital platforms often escape the scrutiny of conventional financial supervision. They're not reporting entities under AML-CFT regimes. They're not alerted to this, but they're not also, in most cases, not even equipped to recognize what's happening and how to address that. So together with the FATF, we really call for more awareness raising, more partnerships, starting from auction houses, museums, art dealers, but also the social media platforms and other stakeholders, so that this approach of following the money and really identifying what's going on is a joint effort, and the understanding of it is fed from different sources and stakeholders. So I really would conclude here because I think the main point here is not just do counterterrorism or law enforcement, but it's really about world's shared history and collective security. And so if we, as the FATF president said, if we close the tap with the money for those actors as terrorists, then we will be much more successful in addressing this story. And I will pass on.
Thank you, Svetlana. And, to cite another great Italian, follow the money was the motto of the late Giovanni Falcone, the judge who really changed the dynamics in the fight against mafia in the 1980s and paid with his life. So I'm happy to remember him. And I'm also happy to say to the Casa Italiana that here we have a majority of Italians, because Cecilia is here on behalf of the United Nations, but I discovered that she's also Italian. So we are 3 against 2. Cecilia is a human rights officer at the Counter-Terrorism, so please give us the human rights dimension of your work.
Well, thank you so much, David, and good evening. I'm Italian, but also I'm Argentinian. So, that's actually, I'm Argentinian and Italian. So, I mean, I think there are many of us in that particular situation. But it's a pleasure to be here this evening, and it's an absolute honor to share the stage today with Dr. Amr. It's really, really a pleasure. And I think we all benefited from watching an amazing and incredibly helpful movie to put us in context into what we have been witnessing. But also, perhaps I would like to tie up this panel by talking about a little bit about what's next, right, in this regard, because we've seen how, for instance, in the movie Adnan risked his life and all of other colleagues who did that. And one of the reasons I think it would be also to provide and to further the possibility of those that committed those crimes to be brought to justice. And this is the context that I'll speak a little bit about in a second. CTED, the organization I represent together with Svetlana here on the podium, has long promoted meaningful accountability for those that commit terrorism-related offenses. And when we think about terrorism-related offenses, we think about, extreme violence. We think about killings, injuring. But actually, in this context, the way in which this terrorist organization, ISIL, in Syria and Iraq exploited cultural artifacts, it's another dimension of terrorist violence. So in that regard, as I mentioned before, the Security Council, since 9/11, as noted by David, had called for member states, governments, to bring terrorists to justice. So how do we do this, right? So The Council as well has time and again condemned the unlawful destruction of cultural heritage in armed conflict situations. This has been long-standing. But the Council only started addressing the interlinkages between terrorism and the destruction of cultural heritage in the early to the mid-2010s, after the shocking damage and obliteration of cultural and religious sites in Timbuktu, Mali. But also as a reaction to the massive, the scale, the destruction of cultural heritage by ISIL in Iraq and Syria in 2015. But we also know that there are several other occurrences of this destruction in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia. But they may be smaller in scale or less mediatized than the ones that prompted the Security Council to act. But that doesn't mean they're less important. I think today's film really helped us to shed much-needed light on the motivations and the modus operandi of those that destroy cultural heritage with a terrorist purpose. As noted already by my fellow panelists, these crimes have an impact on affected communities as well as to the international community as a whole. Again, to retract a bit, we know that terrorist groups are motivated to destroy cultural heritage for ideological reasons. For instance, they are a tool to deny historical roots and cultural diversity moving forward. But also, they do so to loot and traffic for financial reasons, as we've heard. But also we know that the destruction of cultural heritage may end up supporting recruitment efforts, strengthen group morale, and organizational capacity. So really this could be another a way of bolstering terrorist tactics. But we also know that the destruction of sites and buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, or charitable purposes may constitute, pursuant to international humanitarian law, a war crime. This was mentioned in the film a little bit in passing. But the fact that it is a war crime can mean many, many different things. One is the impossibility of the crime to actually be applied a statute of limitation. Even if we take 20 years to find the artifact, there would be an opportunity still to look for those who had looted it or had profited from it. But again, notwithstanding the notion that this might be a war crime, the majority of the exploitation of cultural property for terrorist purposes go largely undetected, under-investigated, and crucially, and I'll talk a little bit about this, unprosecuted. It doesn't reach the criminal justice space. So we know that criminal justice systems across the world have been confronted with investigating and prosecuting conduct that, for instance, if you're a judge sitting in Belgium and you're faced with this artifact, you know that the actual looting had happened and been perpetrated thousands of miles away from where you're sitting. Normally in zones ridden by armed conflict, experiencing a breakdown of rule of law, and the proliferation of different non-armed state actors, non-state armed actors. So in that context, who do you contact? Now we have a new regime in Syria, but in the most recent past, with whom, if I'm sitting again, for example, somewhere in Europe or somewhere in Latin America as an investigator or a prosecutor, I can make use of the databases and the services provided by Interpol, but also if I need to actually cooperate with the war-ridden country where the authorities perhaps do not have reached to those areas where the actual pieces are coming from, there is an impossibility actually to look for perpetrators or look for the artifacts. So we know that this type of investigation requires the use of non-traditional types of information and evidence, including electronic evidence, open source, and social media intelligence that we've seen in the movie happening. And also information collected directly from the conflict zone, including via digital devices. We've seen the colleagues taking pictures, obtaining the phones, and looking for information therein. So one area that CTED actually promotes cooperation in, and I will conclude with this, is that it is important as well that not only investigative but also prosecutorial departments within one jurisdiction and across jurisdictions, for instance, many times prosecutors' offices have an arts crime unit here, and then a terrorism crime unit here, and then a war crimes unit here. They need to actually share information to make sure that they're actually looking at the same example or the same fact from different perspectives. So that would allow the possibility of criminal justice authorities to ultimately adjudicate the full scale of these crimes. Perhaps to conclude, it has been noted by some commentators that the international community has, as of recent, focused much of its efforts almost exclusively on the recovery and the return of stolen objects to the country of origin. But less emphasis has been placed on the issue of who to prosecute and who to investigate and who to ultimately charge. And it has been noted that without criminal prosecutions, particularly those that may result in significant losses for the dealers or even in custodial sentences for the middleman, we might likely not reach the necessary deterrent effect to disrupt not only the illegal trade of antiquities, but the ultimate destruction. Giving a voice as well within criminal justice processes to those that have been affected by this destruction, the ultimate victims on a variety of settings, as also noted in the movie, can ultimately also lead to booster resilience for affected communities and be able to rebuild. Thank you very much.
I think in your conclusion, you came to the point that I wanted to kind of bring to the fore, and that's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the problem itself. The problem is an issue of supply and demand. So far, what we've been talking about is the supply side. And we fault the supply side. The supply side is the problem. The supply side is the terrorist. The supply side is the criminal. The supply side doesn't look after its cultural property. It doesn't care for it. It's the supply side. And we attack this, and we blame the supply side for almost all of it. But there's a demand side. And where's the demand side? It is in Western Europe and North America. Okay? And that's the demand side. And what drives the supply always is the demand. It is not the supply is there because the demand is there. We want to fight the drug problem, so we blame the supplier. No, the problem is the demand here. And it's the same with cultural property. If there was no demand, there would be no supply. They would find something else to supply. They would go look. This is a money-making thing. If it's not gonna, if there's no demand for it, they're not gonna make money. They're gonna find something else to do. So why is the demand so persistent and able to continue? Because there is, and as you quite rightly mentioned, there is very little prosecution. Not just, the problem is not just the difficulty, and you know this, if you work, I mean, you are law enforcement. You know, the problem of prosecuting some guy in the middle of a jungle or in the middle of a desert or in some conflict zone is complicated. But the dealer who's sitting in Paris or London or Rome, who is openly selling, knowingly looted, trafficked antiquities, and at the end of the day, if they are caught, or if they are stopped, or if they have a shipment, intercepted, they get a slap on the wrist. I'll give you a simple example because this is one of the famous ones. It's one of my favorites. You all know the story about the beautiful gold sarcophagus that was in the Met, just down the road, and it was bought by the Met through a French well-known dealer with often, for every piece he sells, there's probably 5 that are very, very naughty, okay? And he sells it to the Met for some $5 million or something. I can't remember the exact amount. And then Kim Kardashian has at the Met Gala has a photographs herself next to it, and it goes viral. And then a few months later, because it's viral, there's a guy sitting in Upper Egypt in some basement somewhere, and he's flicking through his phone like, everybody does. And he goes, "Hey, wait a minute. I stole that. And I gave it to so-and-so said didn't pay me. They did not pay me. I didn't get paid." Yeah, exactly. They claimed it wasn't sold, and yet here it is in the Met, with Kim Kardashian. I want my money. And eventually it ends up in Matthew Bogdanos's, office, and Now, the story, it's okay, we're laughing, but what happened? What happened to the person in the Met who bought the item? Nothing. What happened to the dealer, the French dealer who sold it? Is he in jail? No. Why? That's the question. That's the elephant in the room. Why are these people? You know the Steinhardt case. That was the big Steinhardt case here. What happened to Steinhardt? Did he go to jail? He had his looted artifacts of his antiquities confiscated. The ultimate sanction was he was never going to be allowed to collect again. Naughty boy. Seriously, you have over $80 million worth of looted antiquities. Now, just think of it. If some of those antiquities had been bought and trafficked through an ISIS-controlled territory, or some other terrorist, I'm sorry, this is very delicate and nasty, but I have to say it. Guys, just think of it. The next time a plane flies into one of our buildings, it could have been funded by you buying a looted antiquity from some very unpleasant people, thinking you're doing good or saving it, or just adding to your collection. This is a serious problem. And we only look at the supply side, look at the demand side. That's where the issue is. That's where you stop it. Stop it from the demand side. Change the laws in Europe and in the US. Criminalize. I talked to Bogdanos, Matthew. He's a good friend of mine. Why aren't we doing... He says, I do what I can with the laws I have. Until you buy a house. I'm buying a house right now. You buy a house. You do a title search. You buy a car. You check to see if it's if it's really, and yet there is the bare minimum of any kind of due diligence that you can do,
Professor,
and you can buy.
I think this is the idea of the database that was presented by Gabriele.
No, the database will. I'm sorry.
That should be.
It doesn't matter. If the database is there, if you are not penalized for not checking the database, then it makes no difference whether the database is not or is there or not. The problem is not whether there's a database
and the
or not.
certificate that tells you that this comes after the 1970 convention, which every state has implemented. So the laws,
but they are so
there.
easy to fake, and the one with the Kim Kardashian, I know because I was told the paperwork was so shoddy and so fake and so pathetic. A 5-year-old could have figured out this was looted.
So it's an area that is not, let's say, taken seriously by national systems, because the international convention is there.
Of course.
It doesn't necessarily criminalize. It's not a criminal law convention.
But it's not the convention. It's not the convention. It's the laws of the countries. It's the laws of the EU. It's the laws of the US. It's the laws of France. It's the laws of Belgium. Do you know... Anybody care to tell me how easy it is, how terrible the laws in Belgium are for prevention of, literally, whose fault is it if I buy, it all falls under the whole thing of buyer in good faith. Really, good faith? Well, you're buying a looted antiquity. I didn't know it was looted.
Every time it's in good faith. If you are a good lawyer, you have always to support the good faith.
You buy a stolen car, you go to jail. You buy anything looted, something, you go to jail. But you buy a looted artifact, antiquity, you don't go to jail. How is that supposed to work? And probably part of the reason is because who are the biggest collectors? The very filthy people who make the laws. And of course, the supply side is the weak link in all of this. And so it ends up being blamed for the problem rather than the demand side. It's the demand that's the problem. And until we change the laws to make and criminalize the demand side, this problem will continue. And everything else we're talking about is all very nice, but it won't change. Sorry. That's the truth.
So I would open up the floor to the public. Please keep your questions very short so that we can... I see the lights on. So maybe I see we have first NYU law there. I hope you're from the law school, and then we have Dr. Daniele here in the...
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much to all the panelists. This has been fantastic. So regarding the last couple of comments, specifically in terms of the demand side, in terms of following the money, I mean, I look at the U.S. system where we do have very strict laws that prevent or that penalize and criminalize the provision of material support to terrorist organizations. War crimes, that provides a universal jurisdiction to any nation to punish and prosecute. So do you think that the issue is actually that the laws don't exist, or is it that there's a hesitancy of domestic mechanisms to actually use them?
Exactly. If you were to prosecute any one of those dealers or buyers who were caught buying looted trafficked antiquities under the Terrorism Act, I guarantee you, within a week, everybody would be behaving themselves. That's the problem.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to react to this because, yes, we keep the tendency to blame one or the other side or whatever, but it's the combination of it that you need to look at. And one of the points I think I skipped in my intervention is when we say follow the money, in this particular context, we also say investigate the potential link with terrorism. In many national authorities, the people who will deal with crimes related to cultural property have nothing to do with terrorism, and they don't look past that, and vice versa. If you have a custom violation, it does not go to national security or terrorism issues. And really everyone, what I tried to make clear in my intervention, everyone from different authorities, from different stakeholders in the private sector, in the archeology community, in the research community, has a role to play, and only joining these together in one piece will hopefully make a result. I also wanted to make a point on the issue of accountability and how it doesn't work, even if we have the laws. It's not necessarily it's not only all the challenges about enforcing and the will to enforce, but also how these laws are formulated. With Katie, we discussed it in a recent event, an example where the dealers were actually punished by a fine. It's crumbles for them. What it did to them, it busted their reputation that they actually sold genuine stuff and not fake things. This is the point where we're at. So, it's a much more complex puzzle, I would say.
Dr. Danieli, please.
Yeah. I am Dr. Danieli, but I'm not Italian. So
but it sounds, what counts is
that's why I said I'm not Italian. Sorry, but... but I want to add, I direct the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma. So I want to speak from that perspective, even though from an old United Nations person, I think we should acknowledge the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime and their contribution to transnational crime and to everything we are talking about. But going back to the point of multi-generational legacies of trauma, I very deeply share your sense of awe and astonishment looking at beautiful history or historical beauty or historical meaning. And of course, everything about what we are talking about is exactly that. And from our point of view of traumatology, this has to do with what we call identity healing. So when David suggested to you that you get a job in the new government, while it was cute and funny, I think there is the current government is very complicated anyhow, as we know, but perhaps it doesn't yet have the sense of importance of the meaning of art to Syrian identity and how important it is to bring back, the nation, to do anything to bring back culture, particularly because so much of it was destroyed. And the country is wounded in so many other ways. The symbolism of returning parts of one's identity that was wounded is so much more important because it's wounded.
I understand what you're saying.
And I wouldn't want it to wait for years and years, as you do now with the museums, European museums and American museums, with the indigenous people and with Africa, etc. But you can see the joy when artifacts and art comes back. It feels like I'm more whole. So please don't forget those aspects, the aspects that are crucial to the identity. I also want to say something a little more funny, which is not funny. Art looting is a colonial symptom, right? It's an aspect of colonialism.
Yes.
And so when you're talking about the demand, it's still the same class of people. Of course,
it's a perpetuation.
It's the same class of people who can buy it and they collect it to show to their friends. It's still there. It's still on that psychohistorical level. But please do respond perhaps to the identity healing aspect.
I will be very brief in my response. I will tell you this. Syrian identity is a very fragile and complex issue, partly because it was always submerged and subject to supra-identities that always came above it, whether they were regional, whether they were sectarian, whether they were ethnic, or later on even political identities like Baathism or Nasserism or Pan-Arabism. And they all came at the expense of a true kind of Syrian. So today, if you ask a Syrian, what is a Syrian, he won't be able, or she won't be able to answer you with... But, exactly. But every Syrian knows, okay, who Queen Zenobia is. Every Syrian knows that the first alphabet came from Ugarit. Every Syrian knows where Apamea is and the dead cities. And that is why I said in the film, and I believe it today, that the key to our future is in our past. Because that's the glue, that's the only remaining glue that holds us together at the moment, pending our reconstruction and revitalizing and essentially creating a newer, more concrete and viable version of what a Syrian is and our identity. So yeah, no, we're totally aware of that.
Last round of quick questions. Who do we have? One? Only one? Two? Okay. Very good. Thank you so much for being so patient.
Good afternoon, Chief Warrant Officer Stefano Bergonzini, Italian Carabinieri, currently serving at the Permanent Mission of Italy. Captain Scarpa, thank you so much for your presentation. If I may highlight something that might be of interest for the public here, the ID art application also gives you the possibility to actually create a record for art that you possess. So should anything happen to that piece, law enforcement has an easier way to actually make the connection, and it just speeds up the restitution.
Even if it's looted?
Sorry?
Even if it's looted?
Well, that would be very smart. That would be very smart. Please do that. If you have looted stuff, please put it on the ID art. Ms. Svetlana, you said that the United Nations doesn't have a police. Actually, I served in 6 missions as a police officer, and last one was in 2009. Unfortunately, we never had anything in our curriculum, pre-deployment induction training during the mission that spoke about cultural property protection. Has something changed since then? Do we have any courses? Is that part of the curriculum? And Professor Amr, good to see you on this side of the pond. Hopefully soon in Vicenza.
Very good.
This movie, the video that you showed us today, was the best product I've ever seen about cultural heritage protection. This was absolutely fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. Obviously, I agree about the demand. What to do? Should we pester our senator? And then, okay, we need to do something. Should we name and shame important people that are flaunting that stuff? What to do? Thanks.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you. And the last question from my student. Finally, one of my students has the courage to speak. Lola.
Hi, thank you so much for this entire event. It's been amazing. I was wondering how you might suggest going about increasing transparency between government agencies and these private tech companies and how to potentially speed up that process, or if there needs to be legal ramifications, or the best way to go about that through sanctions, or what might be best? Thank you.
I think this is a very interesting topic, and there should be a lot to discuss. I can address from both perspectives as Interpol, but also for my law enforcement background from as a national police agency in Italy. I will start with from the Interpol perspective. This is a complex challenge, and just consider that also for Interpol is sometimes even more complex because, as I said, Interpol is the largest international police organization, and we work across a variety of legal frameworks. And Interpol has developed itself a very complex regulatory framework. And so even in the interaction that Interpol can have, there are several limitations and constraints. I can tell you, just to not to steal too many time, Interpol has developed protocols and partnership with tech companies, with other subjects in the field. But there's something important to highlight for Interpol is that Interpol has not investigative power, so Interpol cannot perform investigation. We are a platform which brings together investigation from national member. So this is from the Interpol perspective. I can add something from my law enforcement background, and I can tell that this is probably one of the best ways to address the issues is establishing protocol. There are several issues because there could be another topic to discuss about, which is how much collaborative sometimes these digital platforms are with law enforcement. We mentioned some of the platforms, for example, Telegram or Meta, and it's complex because there are, it depends sometimes where these digital platform and company have their legal basis. So what is the regulation that apply for that? You know that, for example, in terms of free speech, because we can, for example, talk about the hate speech or the hating of social network. We know that, for example, the legislation in the United States is different from the European Union. In the European Union, we have the Digital Act. We have now the discussion ongoing about the chat control regulation. So it's completely different, the approach. And so even for law enforcement and for police cooperation, there could be challenges. So if you ask me about what can be the best way to speed up the procedure, I don't want to answer, but it's complex. I mean that, and once again, coming back and resuming from the Interpol perspective, again, this is the real answer and the most honest answer that I can give you is it's truly to enhance a sincere and efficient police cooperation, to establish as much as possible protocol with 10 companies, and try to perform efficient investigations. This is another important aspect to take into account. But as I say, the challenge is a huge challenge for law enforcement globally, and this can be just some of the answer. I don't know if you want to add something.
If I can add one thing, I would like to denounce the platform Quora, Reddit, and many others for misinformation. I quote, EU is planning a new mass surveillance law that includes mandating data. There is an EU directive aimed at creating responsibility for those who publish materials that are defamating, misinformating, spreading, inciting to crime. And this is presented as censorship against our freedom. No, this is protecting us. To attribute responsibility to when there is a website that produces a certain information, it's not only the person typing at home the false information that is responsible, it's also the person that allows you to have a public account. Why you have to talk to the entire world? You normally talk to your friends, to the people who accept to talk to you, correct? You are not the New York Times. Why is it that each and every internet provider has to be like a public? If he is a publisher, if she's a publisher, he or she has to be accountable as if it was a publisher. That's what the European Union wants to do. This draft directive is encountering the strongest lobby campaign ever seen. So I publicly denounce this. When we will have this directive, we will have a tool to make these entities accountable, from X to Meta to you name them, all of them. So, but we are not yet there. So it's a major, major fight. And this has to be to protect our human rights. It's not censorship. This anarchy on the web, it only helps those who are stronger to be stronger and stronger, and those who are weaker to be weaker and weaker and exploited more than they are today. It's a false idea. And the problem is that we are violating the fundamental principle. You wear that wonderful sweatshirt, NYU law. Every legal system is based on one very simple principle: the equality of all before the law. These entities are more equal than us. So we have to bring them in compliance, and we need to make very serious reforms. The European Union is the only body, the European Commission, at least they tried with a draft. Very weakened now. But we have to realize that there are efforts, but they are victims of this type of mass misinformation. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps just to respond a little bit to that question again, or react and to add to Gabriele. So in the context of counter-terrorism and the adjudication of terrorism-related offenses, we've been thinking long about the issue of electronic evidence. I alluded to it in passing in my remarks, but just to mention that in cooperation with other partners, including UNODC, the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes, CTED, another counter-terrorism specialized body within the UN, have created practical guidance on how to request the preservation of information that is published on social media platforms or other digital means, so that that information can be later on not destroyed, but actually that information can be shared later on with, not only law enforcement, also prosecutorial agencies, but not only the information and the content itself, but also metadata. So who had published it and why and under what context. So there's quite a lot of practical guidance that had been offered from the point of view of the counterterrorism space. So just to, suggest that you can also consider checking that out. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, Amr, if you want to have a final word of wisdom and hope.
I think the final word of wisdom and hope is go forth, think before you buy antiquities, and I think thank you very much for coming and attending.
Thank you very much. And